I have been so excitedly nervous about this, and I actually do like looking around the room and I see a lot of familiar faces, which is lovely. And I felt so sick about today actually that I thought what I should ask first is raise your hands if you've ever had a bad day. Anything will do, some sort of version of bad. Good. If I collapse at any point in time because it comes too much, I get overwhelmed, I vomit, one of you either step up, talk about your bad day, or talk amongst yourselves because you can all share something. So the reason that we are all here is to talk about the challenge that we collectively have to create safe workplaces. And I say safe workplaces because, you know, if we create safe workplaces, then it's accessible for everybody. My name is Dr. Caroline Howell, and I actually rarely introduce myself like that, but I think that that's part of the reason that why I have been asked to speak. I have several degrees in psychological health now, and I've worked in this industry for about 20 years, probably 25 or creeping into 30. I have worked in this area for such a long time, but also the second reason that I think that I was asked to speak was because I was in such psychological distress at the beginning of last year that I wanted to kill myself. And what's interesting is this speech I have practiced more than any other speech I have ever given in my entire life. And someone last week said to me, could you not use the word kill? Could we use the word end your life instead? And if I think back to how I felt at the beginning of last year, I genuinely wanted to kill that life. And so maybe that's a different way of looking at it. So let me explain to how I end up here in front of you today. A bit of a history tour of Caroline. I was 12 when I first started to get sick. And that's physical sickness. I had a congenital heart disease. I was 13 when I was repeatedly sexually assaulted at school by fellow students, which is fun. 15, I was formally diagnosed with a heart condition. At 17, I had open heart surgery. And then at 19, I fell in love. And I got engaged. And then at 20, I watched my fiancé pass away. At 22, I fell pregnant and got married in that order, which is not the right way to do anything really. At 27, I had my second baby, and in between the two children, I had 4 miscarriages. At 32, I was diagnosed with 2 different primary cancers, and at 35, I had my third. Meanwhile, I studied a lot, and I had achieved 3 degrees in psychological health. I made it my life's work to help people. I was literally built for war. I have spent years studying the intricacies of people. I have judged them. I wasn't one of them. I looked at them curiously. I've been a rehab counsellor for a long time, and so I kept looking at these people that I was working with, and I was thinking, you poor thing, that's not me. That's you with your little, ups and downs and your illnesses. I'm so together. And I operated in that frame of mind for a really long time until about the beginning of last year. I was asked to write a bullying and harassment workshop, and a very dear friend of mine said to me, I think this would help you. And she gave me 2 pieces of paper, and they were the cycles of violence for domestic violence. And I don't know if you've seen them or not, but they're so simple and beautiful. And the first one talks about what a violent relationship looks like, which is all about power and control. And then the non-violent relationship, which has equality at its core. And I looked at those 2 pieces of paper and I thought, that's very strange, because I don't understand the non-violent one at all. There's nothing about it in my world that makes sense to me. So I quietly did an online abuse test, and I scored 87% on a domestic violence abuse test. And I thought, oh my God, how did that happen? How did my normal suddenly become not normal? And that was when everything started to change for me. Because I started to look at other women, and I used to actually look at other women and I think, how do you get away with going on these girls' weekends? How are you allowed to go shopping and not be GPS tracked? Do not tell me that you can walk in the house and not get yelled at. Don't tell me you can have a full night's sleep and not get woken up being screamed at. Are you kidding that you can put your handbag down, walk away and not have someone go through it? But suddenly there was this thing online that was telling me that I wasn't okay. And that was when things started to change, and that was when I became frightened. Because up until that point, I had nothing to really be frightened of, because it was my normal. It was knowing that my normal wasn't normal that became terrifying. And in fact, up until that point, I was a high-functioning, probably, I say probably because I refused to go to a doctor and get a diagnosis, but I probably was depressed. But in not knowing, I would go and get milk, I would go and do my daily things, and then I would think, and at the end of that, I'll just go and kill myself. It was just like this normal thought pattern. In fact, thinking about it, I didn't realise that other people weren't thinking about it. And it's only now that my life has changed so significantly, I can actually understand that people don't think like that all the time. So I didn't know that over the years my mental health was being fragmented, and it was just this slow stripping away. The things that started to change and what started to have that impact on my life was that people actually started to ask me if I was okay. And it was probably not that they didn't ask me a lot, it was that it took a few different people, a few different ways of asking me if I was okay that made me start to listen. So part of the reason why I was asked to speak was because in passing working, if you're in the industry for a long time, you do get to talk to people. One of my dear friends is now working in wellbeing in icare with me. And so she had known my story and asked me to speak at icare Are You OK Day. And what the interesting thing was that I don't think that my story is necessarily interesting or different or unique from anybody else's. But we have this fear about talking about not being okay because we instantly attach it to mental illness. And I don't consider myself as having a mental illness because I've worked around severe mental illness for a long time. But at the time, when I wasn't feeling at my best and when I knew my mental health was starting to fray, I would actually start to look at homeless people on the side of the street and I would think, I could be you. I am literally a few weeks away of wanting to snuggle in next to you, put my head on your shoulder, because living with you would be safer than where I live right now. And in fact, when I knew that I would rather see myself living in a car was when I knew that I had to drive away. And so to save myself from my situation, that's what I did. I hopped in the car and I just drove away from my life because it was the safest thing to be able to do. I have 2 children plus 1. I inherited an extra child along the way because her mother passed away. And I remember in feeling that distressed, I thought about her and I thought, I got you because your mum suddenly died and there was no one to look after you, and now I've got you. And so the one thing that I won't do is take a second mother away from you. And so it is interesting how those little small things do start to help you think differently. When I did the talk for icare in Sydney, Gosford, our Gosford branch had dialed in and the Gosford link had dropped out. And so poor old Gosford was sitting up there and I start delivering my speech and they're sitting in Gosford and they're going, oh my God, what happened? Is she all right? And so I had to do the speech again in Gosford. When I was in Gosford, I didn't realise that SafeWork were in the room, and they then asked me to come and speak today. The question that they asked me was, did work play a protective factor for you? Now, up until that point, I had never honestly considered the role that work played in my life. Because keep in mind, I had no idea that there was anything wrong in the first place. And then when I did, I was happy to blame everything outside. But I started to think about, given that I had been married for 24 years, so for 24 years this stuff had been going on outside, and then I walk into work every day with this stuff. So I started to look at the patterns between life and work, and what I realised was that at a certain point in time, for several of the jobs that I was in, at some point in time I started to react badly to things that were happening at work. And I would start to interpret that as being micromanaged or bullied or harassed. I left a job because I thought that I was being bullied and harassed. And it was because my husband at the time said to me, you should just get out. Don't worry, we'll work together. This is going to be great. We will work together. You cannot lose. You can't fail with me. And I didn't realise that I was jumping from the pot into the fire with him. The difference with working with him as opposed to working in a work environment was, and in not having any insight at all, was that I didn't realise that there would be no off switch then, because I was using work as a way to get away from my life. So of course, as soon as work started to emulate the behaviours that I was having to put up with at home, given that I thought that home life was normal, I started to react really badly to that. So it's very possible that all the bosses that I gave a hard time and walked around for years, and if anyone knows any of them, I apologise, but maybe they weren't micromanagers, maybe they weren't bullies. Maybe I was just at the end of my ability to be able to cope with my own life before I walked in. So if we're talking about work playing a protective factor, then I have to start to say that it can, but not to create a mentally healthy place for me, but it was a safe place. The reason that I know that is that when I left, at the beginning of last year, I was given a contract to work with icare. And no one could have saved me from the life that I had, because I didn't have the insight that there was anything wrong with it in the first place. But the interesting thing happened when I walked into working with the team that I have at icare. I was able to breathe for the first time. Now that is just luck. That it's got nothing to do necessarily with the employer, it's just the luck of the draw of having people around me that created a safe place for me. And it was because I had that safe place that I was able to start to find a way forward. There's a program that we have to do at work, and it's agility training, because we all have to be agile in these workplaces and we have to be resilient. And I was sent in one of the waves of training, and it said, at this end is death. At this end is thriving. All of you in the room are okay, and what we want to do is get you from okay to thriving, because we want a thriving workplace. And I sat there and thought, well, I thought many rude words that I probably shouldn't say out loud, but I thought, don't you dare tell me that I'm even okay. I'm just trying to stay a day away from death here. You can't even get me to okay, so don't try and make me get to thriving. Just make me okay, and then it will be all right. Sometimes just being okay is okay, and sometimes showing up is a huge amount of effort for people. If you imagine two different types of days, if the first day is you're able to wake up refreshed, you've had an excellent night's sleep, no one has bothered you, the phone hasn't rung, you haven't worried about the children not coming home, no one's vomited in the middle of the night, your house is clean and serene, maybe someone is made coffee for you in the morning, and there might be a candle burning. There are no dishes in the sink. Your clothes are dry, ironed, laid out for you. You don't even have to think about what you're going to wear today. People greet you cheerfully as you walk into the kitchen. There's no traffic on the way to work. Imagine that Sydney has gone to sleep and you can leisurely make your way to work with no stress in under 15 minutes. There's no email when you get there. There are no unnecessary meetings. You're treated with respect. You are valued. You do a good day's work. You spend the time on leisure. You go home, spend the time on leisure activities, and you rest. How many of you have that day? Or the alarm goes off. You've missed it because you were too tired from having to make some sort of Easter hat parade thing the night before. You've woken up in the morning, the kids' notes are nowhere to be seen. Then they tell you it's sport today and they don't have the right shoes. The house is a mess. The neighbours are yelling at you. The dogs, need to have a walk. Your mother calls, you ignore it. You have to pay some bills urgently. Before you even get to work, there has been traffic or the trains were late and you are starting to boil before you even walk into that door. You've had to, the emails are there banking up. You have got a full day of relentless emails, of meetings. And then at the end of the day, there's no milk in the fridge when you want to have that cup of tea. The printer has broken down. You are running late now for some sports activity. You don't even have time to go to the gym or do some yoga, maybe a deep breath. And you go back home to find that there's no food in the house and now you have to start all over again. What about that day? Anyone more familiar with that day? So before we even start and get to work, we're exhausted. And so when we're talking about what work has to do, work can't fix our lives, but we have even forgotten what good looks like anymore. We don't really know what it looks like outside, and we don't really know what it looks like inside of our workplaces. When we're talking about mentally healthy, we're always implying what the optimum is. We don't walk around and talk about physically healthy workplaces. We talk about physically safe workplaces, and we make sure that people can come to work safe and then they can leave safe. But even in our workplace, we have the chocolate drive. But if I was worried about diabetes or obesity, I wouldn't be putting a chocolate drive. I'd be making sure everyone gets their 10,000 steps, and I would certainly cut down most of the meetings. Mental health is not a thing that other people have. And that's something that is so curious for me now. And it's something that I had so little insight around before. I always thought that mental health was something that everybody else had, because I worked in the industry where I was constantly working with other people's injuries or social disadvantage. I never connected it to something that I might have. It's not something that other people have, it's something that we all have all the time. So we all have our good and we have our bad days. So I created this list of tips for workplaces. The first tip is we need to create workplaces that let our employees breathe from time to time. We decided to create physically safe workplaces. We got rid of the smoke break. But maybe we should have just gotten rid of the smokes instead of the smoke break, because those little micro breaks are really important. One of the best managers I ever had insisted we all have morning tea every day, which at the time I thought was a ridiculous idea. However, once a day we had permission for 15 minutes to sit and chat about absolutely nothing. And those people that were involved in that group that I worked in are still my dearest friends, because they were the only group of people from a workplace that I ever had permission to connect with. We then need to be able to ask employees what they want. A few years ago, I was running some research through a big national organisation, and they said, please go and find out what people want around a wellbeing program. And the one thing that people wanted was not the hot yoga at lunchtime. They didn't want the free Specsavers. They didn't want the, coffee barista that, serves the best coffee. What they wanted was permission once a fortnight to be able to have lunch together. That was it. They didn't want fancy. They wanted the ability to connect. because all we really need as humans is the ability to feel like we belong to something. And our community, our closest community, are those that we work with. So that's the reason why these workplaces need to be authentic. They need to create places where people feel like they belong, and we need to be able to be ourselves in those workplaces. We talk about bringing our whole selves to work. We aren't able to cope with our whole selves because our whole selves are sometimes quite distressed. I also have tips for you, because it would be, I just thought, given that I had given all the tips for you in my Are You OK speeches, I would give them to you too. The first tip is that no one will save you. And that is I heard that many years ago. Someone said, no one will save you. I thought, what a strange thing to say. But even if you are the person who is the most distressed, no one will save you. You do not get a reward for dying at your desk. You just get replaced. You need to be, in fact, in some offices, if you die at your desk, they will sweep you up and reallocate your desk because there are no desks left in the building. You need to be fierce about your life. This may not be the life that you asked for, but it is what you have, so you need to be fierce about that. You need to be flexible about your expectations, and things like the programs that we run inside workplaces set us up for failure without intention. The agility course automatically set me up to feel like I wasn't good enough because I couldn't even get to OK. And we have to, as individuals and as companies, take baby steps towards what we're trying to achieve. If I have to think back and how I feel as to whether I'm scared all the time. Now that I know that life can be different, now that I've kind of left my little bubble of ignorance, there's this terror that sits around me of wanting to be able to step forward into this person or this life that everyone thinks that I should be able to lead. So it's a work in progress. But I didn't do it alone, and I actually survived it because people asked me if I was okay. And I think that asking, are you okay, is just the start. It's such a good initiative, but it's just a start. Because a safe place is a place where it's okay to be you, and a safe place is a place where it's okay to not be okay. And our workplaces have to be able to be those places where it's okay not to be okay as well. A friend of mine talked to us last week about how air conditioning should be at 27 degrees because your body needs to be able to burns more calories at 27 degrees than it does at 23 degrees. There's a top tip: if you want to lose weight, drive around with your car engine on up high. The point is this: we stop our physical bodies feeling weather at work. We're confined to a space. We go to work and we stop our minds feeling emotions. In fact, if you see someone fall down and cry, we don't know what to do with it. So we need to be able to create spaces where we can feel, think, and be who we are to be able to start to support each other in a better way. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful summit.